This is the DRS train.
Say what you like about the Soviets, but they did know how to write some tunes. I'm Peter Brook. I'm joined by Ciaron Smith and a returning Nav F1, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. So, if that wasn't obvious, that was the very fine national anthem of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan delivered a very fine race as well. This time last year, what we would have seen at the front would have been a battle for second, because Max would have been 30 seconds up the road. But it's been a very long time, I think, since we've seen a race where we've had three drivers from three different teams battling for the lead for almost the entire race.
Yeah, very fine anthem indeed. Very long one. Is it a whole podcast they're having in the lyrics? Because that was like more than a minute, I think. But yeah, as you said, this race was exactly what we would have had for P2 or P3 last year. And of course, thanks for having me back. I was busy with exams for 2 months. Now I'm done with them, but a fine few episodes you guys had, and it's nice to be chatting to you guys again.
Yeah, good to have you back, man. We definitely missed you, and to just generally summarize my thoughts here, building on Peter's point, it was interesting because we had three different drivers from three different teams, but it also showed that one-stop strategies can be exciting. Depending on the relative pace of the cars and the kind of circuit. So great race, and the start was fairly normal, but it all started to pick up shortly after. Good start by Leclerc.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Let's run team by team again. So we don't say this very often, but the winning team was McLaren. Mixed fortunes going into this because, well, qualifying went well for Oscar, not so well for Lando. That was I'm not sure what to make of that because the commentary was saying there was a white flag being waved, and I was thinking, do we have white flags in motorsport? Like, what does that? Because they said, oh, that signals there's a car going slowly ahead. And it's like, well, that's a yellow flag. But either way, it caught Lando out. He's out in Q1. Still made it up to the front. Actually played the strategy extremely well against Max, and Oscar put on what is comfortably the finest performance of his career thus far, and probably one of the best performances we've seen of the season as well.
Well, I'm just going to put this out there right now. Do you think that Lando wins if he's in Oscar's position yesterday? Because I know Lando fans are really happy about what he did yesterday. It's the first race in a while where not in a while, but it's one of the first races in the season where he hasn't had any major issue or mess up in the race where, he overshoots his breaking point when he's pitting or just makes a dumb mistake. So yeah, Lando fans are, I guess, rightly happy about the performance yesterday. But do you think Lando wins in Oscar's position yesterday? Because something tells me he would have made a mistake somewhat, because Oscar didn't make a single mistake when he took the lead, or he didn't make a single mistake when he had the lead. I'm not too sure Lando would not have done that. And I know that could anger some Lando fans, that I have made this about Lando's mistakes on a weekend where Oscar and Lando both had really good races. But as you said, it's rare to see McLaren win when the opportunity presents itself. And that's because usually Lando is in this position. So something just tells me he would have made a mistake there. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll give my thoughts first quickly then. So I think that Norris did help Piastri quite a bit today. I think holding up Perez right before Piastri came out of the pits was key. It prevented Perez probably from passing Piastri. So Norris was a team player, but that wasn't for the win, as you say, Nav. So I personally think Norris would have found a way to mess up, just because I don't think Norris is psychologically geared to winning dominantly and winning consistently. He makes mistakes under pressure, and then he seems to whine about it in the media afterwards. So we saw a side of Piastri today that Norris probably will be worried about, which is a pretty clinical side when it comes to dueling other drivers. Of course, Piastri makes mistakes as well, but you've got to say this was more convincing than any of Norris's wins thus far, and it reflects very well on Oscar, not so much on Lando. Peter, what do you think?
Well, I mean, of Lando's two wins, the first one was not convincing at all. The second one was, I think, winning by the largest margin of the season. I think Lando could have still won it. He just would have complained the entire time on the radio. Because the one thing that really stood out towards the end of the race was that Oscar does seem to have gotten his hands on tyre management. and that for the past 2 years has been his main weakness against Lando. But then he spent most of the race with Leclerc in DRS range, and then broke away in the last 3 or 4 laps while Leclerc had worn his tyres out, but Oscar could keep going. Admittedly, maybe being in his dirty air that much didn't help, but the tyres just seem to work really well for him. But their temperaments are quite different because Alonso, Oscar never complains really about anything. He just kind of cracks on and does it, and is, it comes across very indifferent about wins and successes as well. And that, so we, but yeah, Lando is under higher pressure because everyone is talking about him as the title contender, and it's like, I think we need to start looking at Leclerc as well in this fight. No one's ignoring him. No one's paying attention to him much. Oscar is further back, but it's still theoretically possible. But everyone is just so hyper focused on Lando. But to be fair to Lando, he drove excellently. Holding up holding up Max, getting stuck behind Albon for that long and keeping Max at bay did work wonders because it meant he could just pass Max anyway near the end. So it was good, and I guess damage limitation because even if he only ate about 3 points into Max's title lead.
You're raising a really good point there. I don't feel people, and that included me, have realized that Leclerc is 19 points behind Norris, and Piastri is 32 points behind Norris. As you said, Piastri is a bit too far, and also clawing back 32 points on your teammate is quite hard, but Leclerc is really not that far away from Norris. So obviously, the McLaren has looked faster over the season, but Ferrari has definitely made inroads since Monza because they did bring upgrades, right? I think they did bring upgrades that are working, so it wasn't just a fluke in Monza or in Baku. It's actual stuff that they know is working, which isn't usually the case of other teams like Aston Martin, for example, who have no idea what works, or even Red Bull lately. They haven't been putting upgrades that work. So Leclerc, I wouldn't say he's in the title fight, but he could very much finish P2 in the championship if Lando still makes mistakes in quali or in the race. And also just McLaren's attitude in general. I mean, I wasn't there last week, but the whole papaya rules thing, we have had big news this week that papaya rules are no longer a thing, that they will prioritize Lando in the title fight, but still, there are some of those cheesy comments. I don't know if you guys remember in the race, I was just going through some notes I had. When Lando's engineer said, imagine Andrea telling you 0 wheel spin at the end of every exit. And it's like, how cheesy can you get? How is this a message you're telling your driver? Imagine our team principal telling you not to wheel spin. Just tell him not to do that. Or is that again a TikTok sentence they've kind of put there to go viral? I mean, what was going on there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure what goes on in Norris's head. But I think ultimately, what was really impressive about this, just to quickly just address the other point, is that like we always go on about, or at least I always go on about McLaren having the fastest car, and I believe they do. I think this weekend the margins were slim. There were 3 teams in the race that were pretty much evenly matched. And only because Piastri and McLaren had a slight advantage on that hard tire, did Piastri have the ability to not only pass Leclerc, but then, keep a gap and pull away. So that's impressive. It wasn't like in, for example, Zandvoort, where Norris had a dominant car. Like he should have just, he made that look difficult at the start for no reason. So this was a very, very impressive win from Piastri because he really overcame the challenge of Leclerc, and he dive bombed Leclerc and just made it look easy after that. So that's very, very, that's going to send shockwaves instead of McLaren, because they're looking at him and saying, do we really want to suppress this guy who maybe is a better driver than Norris is in his second season already? This is going to be something that I think is going to boil over, and I think with Mark Webber behind him, Piastri probably thinks the same way. So it's very impressive in that sense. With Lando, regarding like papaya rules, to your point, Nav, I think I agree with Jacques Villeneuve. I think they're kind of pathetic. I mean, they're not properly enforced. And then when you hear these radio messages, you're thinking, Is this like a like a like a like a club where like kids hang out, or is this like a professional racing team? Like exactly like why are you telling your supposedly driver Imagine Andrea you're the race engineer? You should be able to tell a driver something, and they should be able to respect that. So what is going on there? So one side of the garage kind of looks a little bit dysfunctional. The other side looks a bit more clinical. But overall, yeah, it was a good weekend for the team overall. That's for sure. But they're not operationally perfect yet.
And the other thing on Oscar is that, as you said, this is his second season. We've heard about him for so long. If you follow Formula 2, if you follow Formula 3, you will know him for even longer. But because of all the entire Alpine shenanigans, it feels like he's been on the grid for longer than he has. He's only been on the grid for a season and a half. And he's taking it up to this, in modern terms, seasoned driver who knows the team since 2019, who has the team built around him. And he's taking it up to him and even performing better on some races, or on average, doing a more convincing job. He's 32 points behind Norris, when at some point the season he was like 80 points behind Norris, a 70 or 80. So that bodes well as someone who, quite frankly, that's a personal opinion. I wouldn't want to see Lando become a world champion, or at least I want to see it only if he gets rid of all the several mistakes he's been doing. But next year, for example, if McLaren are as good as this year, but for all the season, they will be the favorites by far. And this reassures me because nowadays I think I can say Oscar could maybe beat Lando over a season, which isn't normal, and I think Lando's not gonna enjoy that. And the wholesome butterfly rainbow unicorn dynamics at McLaren are soon gonna fizzle out, because I think Lando is starting to see the threat that is Oscar, and he didn't expect Oscar to be catching up to him that quickly, but he is. Because Oscar is a great champion, and behind the stoic kind of dry humor driver that we see, there's a very, very fast competitor, I would say.
It's yeah, I don't think it's to really shock anybody that we're seeing this now from Oscar, because it was obvious from his performance and his feeder formulas, just how talented he is. We're kind of encroaching into like Prost Senna territory, only in the sense of things are just going to get tense and not very fun, because in terms of personalities and driving styles, neither of them are really that similar to those two. But there are comparisons that the established driver is being usurped by the young guy who's coming in and taking it to him and beating him, and that's you can see, even though they're still besties at the moment, you can see there's that still kind of tension there, and that will only get more tense if as I said at the beginning of this season, we're just going to pick up where we left off from the year before, which for the most part we did until Miami. If that's the case next year, then it is going to be those two battling it out for the title, and maybe with Leclerc as well.
Yeah, I think I'll make one quick point, and then Nav, I'll let you jump in. I just think it's interesting that the team dynamic is still okay between them, because Norris was happy to help Oscar by blocking Perez. And Perez even noted, like, he's blocking me on his team radio. So, Norris could have said, like, no, that's not my job. Like, I want to race. And it seems like he's still happy to help Piastri. Will he be happy to help Piastri when they're level on points or they're fighting for a win in the future? Probably not. So that's when it'll probably boil over. So agreed. It's only a matter of time before this gets tense.
Yeah, I also think that Lando helped Oscar because he was so far behind, so like blocking Perez didn't cost him too much time, right? He's on a completely different strategy. The best he kind of could have expected was B6, which he got anyway, maybe B5, but that would have been a stretch. So I think that was at play there, and Lando was like, yeah, sure, I'm just going to block this Red Bull, why not? And yeah, as you said, the dynamic, I don't think it's going to last for too long. It's also like, I feel Zach Brown has been telling Lando, we need to make this work. I don't think that Norris by himself is too happy with what's going on right now. But yeah, moving on to Ferrari and Leclerc, we've mentioned Leclerc a lot. They had a very good quali. Leclerc got pole position very convincingly. Baku, it's ironic because his "I am stupid" iconic radio message is at Baku, but Baku is indeed one of Leclerc's best tracks, his fourth pole position there. He just, even in Formula 2, it was one of his best tracks, so he does enjoy this track. But we need to say that something that went a bit under the radar is during the pit stop stage, he did have a 5 second lead on Piastri at that point, and that lead completely disappeared. I saw on Twitter an analysis about this, and it was a mistake by Ferrari, who didn't make good calculations. So they were seeing that uh, Leclerc's tires were degrading slower than Piastri, so they could afford to keep him out for longer. But then they didn't realize that the data they were seeing was that the pace was getting slower relative to the previous lap. So after 3 or 4 laps, they had lost 2 seconds on Piastri's lap, and they weren't realizing that, because on their screen, which is such a rookie mistake by the way, they were saying minus 0.3, and they thought, okay, minus 0.3 on, I don't know what, on maybe the lap Piastri was on, or so they assumed it was fine. And then when they pit Leclerc and during the outlap as well, that's when Oscar, all of a sudden, I think everyone was shocked, Oscar was right behind Leclerc. So that was a bit of a stupid mistake from Ferrari, and that could have been an easy win for Leclerc, I think, without that.
Yeah, I think everybody probably was a little bit shocked on the Ferrari pit wall when Leclerc came out and the gap was way smaller than it was right before the pit stops, as you stated, Nav. I think two things were surprising about Ferrari to me when it came to managing this race. So the first thing was, clearly that car has inferior tire warm-up characteristics to the McLaren, and you'd think that Ferrari would factor that in, but not only did they lose a lot of time by doing that, they put Leclerc out right in front of Piastri, and it's clear that the Ferrari just took way longer to warm up its tires than the McLaren had done. And McLaren got their tires up to temp almost right after Piastri's pit stop. Leclerc couldn't do that, and that's because of the car's inherent features. So right away, Piastri was like all over the gearbox of Leclerc. So now they're in a really tough spot. And then I think Leclerc was a little bit asleep when he was heading into turn one on the lap Oscar pitted him, because basically I think what he had decided in his mind was, look, I need to manage my tires, right? And he probably didn't expect Piastri to come back from that far and overtake him, but had he moved left and covered the line, probably could have prevented that. And so I think that's on Leclerc, in my opinion. Then I think the rest of the race was odd because Leclerc probably, was told, look, you got to manage your tires. But then at the same time, he wanted to stay within DRS range so that he could try and pass Piastri at some point. But lower downforce than Ferrari this weekend in terms of their setup. So they were quicker in a straight line or on the straights. And I think Leclerc burned his tires out more quickly by trying to stay in that DRS zone for too long. And that saw him kind of like drop off a cliff at some point and fall into the clutches of Perez and Sainz. So, Ferrari, Leclerc especially, in good form, but definitely not their best operational weekend, and definitely not Leclerc's finest ever race when you look at the second half. So I'll stop there, and Peter, if you have anything to add on Ferrari and Leclerc, feel free to add to that.
Well, at the moment, I think my nominee for this season's MVP is the hard tyre, because it seems you really need to be able to master it, because we've seen what George did in Belgium, and then Leclerc even last time around in Italy, and then to this yesterday just didn't work at all, because medium tyre was fine, he was braking ahead, that lead vanishes in the pits, and then the hard tyre just doesn't, first of all, it doesn't work as well as Oscar, and then it falls off right at the end too. The other thing that was just fascinating, because of the amount of attempts he made to pass him, none of which worked, because they found, going into the weekend, the DRS activation point on the main straight got moved back 100 meters. And now they've found a sweet spot where overtaking is not too easy, but also not impossible. Because we've seen in the past, even just last year, how easy it was to overtake here. But this time, there were a lot of overtakes, but it wasn't excessive, and people still had to work for them, and you could still defend properly. And that it was just surprising that Leclerc, even without Oscar having DRS, he still couldn't do it. and Checo was getting double DRS effectively, and couldn't do it either. So that did just make it really engaging. And again, it was just the fact that none of them are the title leader, who was nowhere, and that was just really enjoyable spectacle. The other side of Ferrari was interesting. Sainz, I mean, he was kind of invisible for a lot of the race, just hanging around in her third, fourth place. Suddenly catches up near the end, and then we get this collision with Checo, which you look at that and you're like, how did that happen? Because like none of them moved really at all. It's like one of them was at 91 degrees and the other was at 90 on the straight, and just kind of come together like that.
Yeah. So my view on this is as follows. Okay, so I see so many comments. People are like, even Julian Palmer, like Julian's an ex F1 driver. His father was a great F1 driver as well. So of course he has credibility and knowledge. But just because someone doesn't move the steering wheel, it doesn't mean their initial trajectory was like completely straight, right? So to me, Sainz can't be going in that direction and expecting Perez to move. Like, you can't just turn or like have your car moving in a direction where it's eventually going to hit the other driver if you're on a main straight. At the end of the day, you should be cognizant of where that other driver is, and he still had enough space to keep his like straight trajectory. It's not like he had no space. So I put that crash mostly on Sainz. I believe it was Carlos Sainz's fault. I think Perez, of course, could have avoided it, but Perez had every right to be where he was. These fans online saying like, oh, Perez should have moved left. Why should Perez have moved left? It's completely okay for him to be alongside Sainz. It was Sainz that should have checked his mirrors and seen that he was actually headed, like Peter said, maybe just a slight, not exactly straight, just slightly diagonally left, and he should have backed out of it or moved slightly to the right. Nav, what do you think?
I think it was personally a 70-30 situation where it's mostly Sainz's fault, fully unintentionally, by the way. I think it's obvious it wasn't intentional, but he's the one who causes the crash. As you said, he's the one who's not going straight. Checo, I feel like he doesn't have to go left, but if you're overtaking a car, just leave some space, man. Like, he didn't have to be this close either. He could have, as you said, he could have, but why is he that close? Just leave some more space. At that stage of the race, just do your overtake, but just move a bit. All of it was just a bit obscene and unlucky, obscene, ridiculous, and it just wasn't. It's good that it happened, because otherwise we would have had a Baku without any crash beside, like, Stroll tapping Tsunoda on lap one, and that was diabolical. The fact there was no safety car, no red flag, no nothing, was again an indictment to how safe the sport is and how, I guess, good also the drivers have become. But there wasn't any incident until this freak accident. That's not normal. So in some way, yes, I'm glad that happened. But in another way, it really felt ridiculous at that stage, especially for Checo, who was genuinely having a fantastic weekend and could have had the win if Lando hadn't blocked him. Like, I don't think he did anything wrong in the race. Maybe he could have, driven faster, but the only way you can compare him is with Max, and he was driving faster than Max. So whatever Max had as issue, Checo was outperforming him. So it is unlucky for him, and everyone has been slating Checo all season. So when he does have a good race, I think we have to credit that.
I keep looking at this thinking racing incident, but then some people have compared it to Turkey 2010 with Vettel and Webber. The difference being there that Webber had nowhere else to go, whereas if Sainz is coming off to the right, Checo still has the whole of the rest of the track to move into. He doesn't have to necessarily, but even so, the two of them didn't need to be that close together that early on in the straight. But you can say to Sainz, okay, he got his angle wrong and should have changed it. But the thing is that Checo was behind him. Checo could see that. He could see how close Sainz was, so he did have the opportunity to move further out, even if it meant that, obviously I get it means going out onto marbles and dust and all of that. But it's like, it's like use a little bit of common sense. It's like driving on a motorway in that you just don't take unnecessary risks to try and keep your distance. That sort of thing, especially that close to the end of it, because he probably could have had him going into turn 3 from that position anyway. And it did kind of spoil it. I mean, the thing is, I was looking at this thinking, like, Checo was driving well, and I think other than Jeddah last year, that might be, well, I don't know, other than his 2 wins from last year, wouldn't that be the only time he's beaten Max when they both finished a race, if he had finished the race? I think it's the first time he's actually ever out-qualified him in a fair fight without Max either having a mechanical problem or a penalty as well.
What a big mistake, like a very big obvious mistake by Max.
Yeah, actually, Jeddah 22 was Checo got pole, didn't he? But I think Max messed up there too. So yeah, and that, I was looking at thinking, well, this is just they're going to keep him next year because he's driven well at one of the 2 circuits that he's good at, and then crashes at the end anyway. And the next good one is Singapore. But
Yeah, I was just thinking that there's no side draft like in NASCAR, so why was he that close? And second thing is, a bit more on Sainz. Sainz, I think, was driving a good race. Like he was 45 seconds behind the pack, but that was exactly what he should have done, because there would have been no purpose in just being in a train with the others, because he would have killed his tires. So I don't know if it was on purpose or if he just happened to be there, but he had a very good chance of finishing P2, I would say, unless they would say to hold position, but he had the pace to get P2 at the end. So again, that was quite smart from Sainz. And Checo, he just didn't need that. We just didn't want to see that. And then going into the third team represented this race. So this race was interesting because the podium was comprised of 3 drivers who had won Formula 3 and Formula 2 back to back, who are also among the only drivers who have ever won Formula 3 and Formula 2 back to back. The only other one I can think of is Giacomelli in the 80s. It's very rare. Also, there wasn't really Formula 2 for ages. There was Formula 3000, so that was hard. But yeah, so Piastri, Leclerc, and Russell, 2 very good feeder series drivers, were on the podium together. Russell, he just didn't do anything this race, and then he picked up the scraps, which is exactly what he could have done. The Merc wasn't as fast as the other cars. They said it, they knew it. They thought maybe being good on straights could help, but I mean, he was chilling in 5th, and then he got promoted to a podium place. And the more interesting case is Lewis Hamilton, who just couldn't seem to make up places. He admittedly had one of his worst races, he said, and also the car was behaving really strangely for him. But he was stuck behind Colapinto and Behrman and fighting Colapinto and Behrman for so long, and that was quite funny because those are drivers who were 2 years old and 4 years old when he won his first race.
Yeah, I think that's telling. Lewis is now one of the oldest guys, and clash of generations there, I suppose. But it's interesting you mentioned Lewis, because I actually think, yes, Lewis's race was interesting, but I actually think George's race was deceptively interesting. And here's why I think that. Because if you look at the initial part of his race, like you said, it wasn't that spectacular. I think he got passed by. Who was it that he got passed by at the start? Was it Max? I think Max passed him at the start, and then George was just nowhere. It was difficult on that medium tire. I think he was like over a second off the leader's pace, and he had a lot of issues with the rear tires. But then, as soon as he put that hard tire on, in that final quarter of the race, final whatever it was, 15, 20 laps, he was a second quicker than anybody else. And that doesn't make any sense. Yes, they were all fighting amongst each other at the front, but it wasn't a second difference. Like the car just looked like a rocket ship. And I think everyone at Mercedes now is scratching their head because, to see a gap, a delta that big, that suggests that they don't fundamentally understand something about their car still on these tires. And I'll just wrap this segment up by saying, George did a better job, I think, with keeping his tire temps under control. Lewis had been struggling with tire temps all weekend. And despite traffic, I think, he had good speed, but he just wasn't on top of that as well. just throughout the weekend. So I don't think it was a good weekend for Mercedes. Um, they had serious issues with rear tires overheating, and I think overall they don't understand their car perfectly yet because man, George's pace was incredible on that hard tire, and if he hadn't lost that much time in the first stint on those mediums, he wouldn't have just passed Verstappen with that kind of pace. Let me tell you, he would have been a contender for something even more than where he finished, second or even the win. So, that's my take on it. It was kind of a terrible weekend in terms of performance, but they still salvaged something. So, not too bad in that sense.
I don't know what's happened since the summer break, but they've just gone back to where they were at the beginning of the season now. Or at least Lewis certainly has, because they were they won 2 races, they were on top of it all, and now they've just slipped back and they're 4th fastest again. I think it's evident now that Baku is one of Lewis's weakest circuits, because if you think that in 2016 he crashed in qualifying and then finished 5th or 6th when Rosberg won it. 2017, okay, there was that coming together with Vettel, and he probably would have won had he not had the loose headrest. 2018. He only won because Vettel locked up and Bottas had a puncture. 2019, he lost to Bottas. 2021 was brake magic. 22, he didn't have a spine by the end of it. And 23, I don't know where he finished, but probably similar to today. But yeah, we're used to seeing him make progress from the back, or in races where he qualifies badly, he inevitably gets into the points. I mean, okay, this one wasn't necessarily him qualifying badly because he made Q3, even though he was beaten by George again. But the progress was very, very slow. And in the end of the day, he only got points because of that collision at the end. Otherwise, he would have finished P11 from P19 starting position. And he was complaining about temperatures the whole time. But it's just, it's strange seeing a driver of his caliber fighting with the 2 rookies on the grid. It's just strange to see, really.
And not just fighting. Behrman was properly giving him a hard time on pure racing, and that's also where Behrman and Colapinto have been fangirling a lot over having had the chance to fight Sir Lewis yesterday, which usually is a bit weird when you see drivers fangirling about another one, but in their case, I think it's valid. I mean, they're 18, 19, 20. They probably didn't expect to be driving an F1 car this year at all. Behrman, well, apart from FP1 sessions, so I think it's quite fair to see them react that way, especially as Behrman was really giving him a run for his money. And yeah, in general, Mercedes, as you said, I don't know really what has happened to them since the break. But the team behind them, they have kind of improved finally, and that's Aston Martin. So Aston Martin this week, finally we saw some improvement. Maybe that's truck related. We never know with them. But Alonso, and it's quite funny that I'm back on the podcast on the one race Alonso decides to kind of show up again when for the last 2 months, I'll make this clear, Alonso wasn't good. Or Stroll was very, very close to Alonso. So my hiatus from this podcast wasn't related to Aston Martin not performing. I've seen some comments say that, which is absurd. I do not care if Aston Martin are in P8 or P12. Like it's not that important to me. But yeah, so Alonso had one of his best races of the season, if not the best race of the season, because it's not just because he finished P6, which should have been P8. It's because when Albon pits for mediums at the end, what Norris did to Verstappen, that's what should have happened to Albon on Alonso. But Alonso, as soon as Albon pits, he dropped his pace by 1 second, and he kept Albon outside the RS range for the entire stint on 35-year-old hards. And again, the perfect comparison is Norris and Verstappen. Obviously, the delta between the McLaren and the Red Bull is not the same as the Williams on the Aston Martin. But yeah, he did a really good job. And Lance on the other side, he's been performing really well. Whether that's Alonso, who wasn't performing well, all we know is that Lance was really close to Alonso for a few races, in quali and in the race. But yeah, Baku just didn't suit him this year, which usually he does perform at, but didn't really work for him.
Yeah, that was probably the best race Alonso's driven this year. He outqualified the Williams. I think, I think Williams and Aston were similar in pace this weekend. I think Alonso just made the difference. I really do, unfortunately. So he's not my favorite driver in any way. So, I just think that he needs to be given credit when he does well, and he did a really good job. I mean, to make his hard tires last 41 laps, to finish as the best midfield runner, I mean, that says it all. Guy put on a clinic. Just Albon and Colapinto, absolutely no match for him. So that's like winning a race in many ways, for him, because he couldn't have done more than that. So his teammate, I have to say, did not have the same trajectory this weekend. He creamed into the side of Yuki Tsunoda at the beginning of the race, and I think that was Lance's fault. I know some people saying Tsunoda as well, but I personally think that was Lance's fault. And then I think he had some kind of a brake pedal issue near the end of the race. So, yeah, that was a horrible weekend for Lance. But the team will be somewhat ebullient, or let's say upbeat, because Fernando's performance was pretty good. Something to build on, let's say.
I mean, I don't have much to say about Alonso because we saw virtually nothing of him in the race. But yeah, P6, why not? Best of the rest. From what until 2 laps before the end was going to be P8, so that's good enough. Yeah, and Stroll gets in that collision, and then the race is done. And even after pitting, his pace wasn't there anyway. He probably was carrying damage or something because he spent the entire race trailing with Ocon and the Saubers, and then just gave up right near the end. But they seem to have like record straight line speed trap in practice, but then obviously just nothing in the corners. I suppose because the big news for Aston this week, if you can call it news, is everyone's known about it for the past 3 months now, is that Newey is going there next year or whatever. Now we know that's happening, so we'll see if that does improve fortunes. It's just that it's going to take a long time for the effect to set in, because not really till 26, 27 is the car going to have his hand, and then you kind of look at it and kind of dread the idea that Lawrence is basically just trying to set this up to give Lance a title, whilst also having probably the least compatible teammate imaginable in a scenario like that alongside him. That's not going to work, because first of all, it would take Herculean efforts to get Stroll to win the title, but Alonso is never going to stand for that if he thinks number 3 is on the cards.
Alonso's not going to stand for that, and if they do get Max is even less going to stand for that. More and more, I feel like Lawrence is not dumb. He was a bit delusional regarding his son for a few years. I mean, delusional or loving, take it as you want. That's often the discussion about how parents view their kids. But I feel like even he knows Lance is not really world champion material. So my thoughts are that he just wants Lance to get a win, which will probably happen if Newey makes a Newey car. Chances are at some point Lance will probably get a win, and I think that might be the objective now, because Lance is the only driver out of any top team on the grid who doesn't have a win. And even in the backmarkers, well, Bottas and Ricciardo, they have wins as well. So yeah, he is the only driver in a good car who's yet to have a win, and I think that really reflects badly on him. Like, even Oscar has had 2 wins now, George has wins. I feel like that's the plan. Not making a pun there, but I think that's the plan for Lawrence. Do you guys think that in 2026 we might see Alonso in a title fight? Because as an Alonso fan, who all I want is him to get another win, whether that's 33rd or 32nd, as Kyron would say. I just want him to get another win. I feel like a title fight over a season might be a bit too much for a 45-year-old Alonso.
So I want to just make a quick interjection, and I will definitely give my thoughts on that. So I actually disagree with you on this, Nav, and I think your point is very sound, and I agree with the fundamental premise that Lance isn't technically good enough, but Lawrence Stroll is much more passionate about racing than Lance is to me, right? Like, Lawrence is a massive car and racing lover, enthusiast. he's always said that like he wishes he was an F1 driver. He led the consortium that created Racing Point, known as Aston Martin. And what I see is someone who, and this is me playing psychologist here, so feel free to poke holes in this, but I see someone who lives vicariously through his son. And it's so obvious to me that he's like pushing his son to do this. And that it's almost like Lance is putting up with this. Because Lance Stroll, I'm sure, loves racing, but his father's the one that I think that's really driving this. And I don't think the goal is to just win a race. There's way too much money that's being put into this for it just to be his son winning a race in a fast car. They will make sure that Lance will have a title shot if that car is the fastest or is a typical Newey rocket ship, as they say. And I think this is what Alonso is underestimating. And this is what Max Verstappen would underestimate if he signs with them. And I think Adrian may even have underestimated this. I really don't think Lawrence Stroll, if they get a rocket ship like a 98 McLaren, I could put money down now that the other driver's car will start breaking down. Okay, this is my opinion. This doesn't reflect your opinion or Peter's opinion. This is my opinion, Byron. So I actually think this is going to be fascinating. And to your point, do I think they'll have a fast car right away in 26? It's possible. I mean, Newey has shown that he can do that. But if I look at what happened with Red Bull, it took a few years to get to that stage. Now, I think Red Bull were just starting at that time as well. Aston have been in F1 for a few years, so I think there's every possibility that they'll have a race-winning car in 2026. Whether it's a title winner or contender right away, difficult to say, but I have no doubt it'll be competitive with Newey on board.
Yeah, I feel like with Stroll, it's hard to think of other drivers held to such a low standard in many respects, because the thing that's kept him going is that he turns into Schumacher for about 5 minutes per season and then fucks off the rest of the time. But if there's any justice, and this is the plan a lot of people want to see, is that if he's not delivering when they are actually fighting for titles and all of that, that he will then just be pushed into their hypercar division. And I'm sure he could be very good at that, and probably be very happy there because it's much less high pressure and less intrusive. And then they can get Max, or if they even remember that they've got a driver development program, trial Drogovic or Jack Crawford or somebody like that. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I didn't think I'd be saying this 15 years ago, but I would love to see Alonso fight for a third title, especially at the age of 45, kind of matching the drivers from the 1950s. But it would say make a huge statement about him, but also about driver longevity in general, so that at this age you can actually still be competitive if you have the will and you have the fitness and the talent. You don't have to hit 40 and think, okay, it's time to call it a day or whatever.
Yeah. Nav, do you have anything to say to that before I jump? I'll jump in after you jump in.
Not really. Just that. Again, Alonso in a title fight would be great for the sport. Would be great just for fans worldwide. I mean, he would be probably competing with Antonelli in some capacity, who was born after Alonso became a world champion and had like 15 race wins already, which is insane. And I don't think the sport ever expected that to happen, a driver to be competing with another born after he became a champion. So, I mean, that would be fun just for the narratives and all the stats and posts that people will do. I'm sure that Peter would get some good video ideas if Alonso ever performed in 2026, because the number of wacky stats that would come out of it, podiums or wins at a certain age. And I mean, he would be the driver with the longest time between two wins as well. I mean, yeah, so just in that sense, it would be fun. Let's see what happens. Newey being paid £30 million is kind of insane, because he's now the third highest paid British person in sports in the world after Lewis Hamilton and Tyson Fury. Again, just incredible numbers. And I want to stress this. Newey wasn't just given a salary to compete at Aston. He was given a salary and basically, I don't know how many shares, a lot of shares, and he became a partner, I think, at something at Aston. So yeah, he was offered just everything by Lawrence to secure him. and it worked. So let's see what happens.
If only
Right.
like Vettel could have just prolonged saving the bees and stuck it out for a couple of more years, and they could have been reunited there.
Honestly, Seb, what are we doing here? But the problem here is that I disagree with both of you because I don't think Alonso. Okay, let me preface this. I think he has the talent and the adapt, and he has just incredible performance window where he will be able to be competitive at that age. I think, and it is inspirational for some people. I don't think this guy deserves a chance to fight for another title. I'm sorry. I mean, it's like people just want to forget what happened in the early days and just like, oh yeah, let's wipe the slate clean. Like if you walk into your team principal's office and say, if you don't give me number one status, I'm going to the FIA and bringing this team down with me. I don't think you should be allowed to race in Formula One. Like I truly believe what he did in 2007, which many people maybe don't even understand what was happening behind the scenes, should have precluded him from competing in the sport. And I don't think a proper investigation has happened for Crashgate because I find it unbelievable that he didn't know that happened either. That's just ridiculous. So do I
Where
think
I
some
differ,
yeah,
where I
okay, go
differ
ahead.
with you is I do agree. I also struggle when drivers had a certain attitude. I struggle to move away from that. So, for example, Vettel, I hated when in 2018 and 2019 he became the darling of every fan. Oh, he's so cute. Look how
Yeah, me too,
nice
me
he
too.
is. He is the perfect father, which is fair, but the perfect human being in Formula One. And I was like, 5 years ago, this guy, I saw him do things at Red Bull that I had never seen before. Granted, I was younger, so I hadn't seen like some of the shenanigans in the 90s or whatever, but Vettel was a monster against Mark Webber and everyone else. And then now he was all of a sudden, oh, this nice little palace. Same for Lewis. Lewis, he became this super good human PR trained, um, like butterfly. When a few years before that, 2011, he was more famous for what was happening off track than on track. He had all of these issues, all the controversies, and that got forgotten. Where I feel like there's a difference for Alonso is that, as you said, the main issues are late noughties, and there have been like 15 years. So I'm willing to. That's the main difference. It's not just 4 or 5 years like in the case of Vettel Hamilton. You say that he hasn't changed, which is your opinion. That's fine, but it's the fact that they are 15 years. That's what makes me more able to like
Look,
dissociate from that stage.
okay, look, Nav. I mean, I respect that, and I think that's a fair point. But are we forgetting that at McLaren Honda, Button has gone on record saying that these two would like purposely retire their car? Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
who does this guy think he is? Like, and I actually don't understand the fans' love for Fernando Alonso. It's like they don't even care about values anymore. It's like, oh, because he's funny and yeah, he's monstrously talented. We've known that since Formula 3000. Go look at his win at Spa that year, the only time he's ever won at Spa. Guy's amazing. But he has a serious
Oh yeah.
character issue.
I hadn't realized that. That's a good point. I hadn't realized there's
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Hmm.
He couldn't win in F1, right? Yeah. So, I mean, the problem is that, this guy has done so many bad things in his career, and people just want to, he had a nickname in the noughties. I don't know if you guys remember, Teflonso, because nothing ever sticks to him. And bottom line is like, I don't think he deserves a shot at another title. He's had his time. I mean, if he wants to compete, that's fine, but I wouldn't be happy to see him win, but I wouldn't take anything away from him, and I wouldn't say anything other than this is one of the most gifted drivers in the history of Formula One. But I really have an issue with his character, and I say that objectively without trying to be mean spirited. I think the way he's conducted himself throughout his career, not just the naughty snaff, has not been professional, and so for that reason, I'm less enthused about it. Let's just put it that way, while giving him credit.
When it comes to things like having it written in your contract that you're supposed to be the number one and given preferential treatment, part of me feels like, okay, well, if you have the street cred to back that up, then you may as well go for it. And at the time he did, having just won the last two championships. But then also it does, and again, Alonso is not the only driver guilty. Loads of drivers who have had contracts like this. It also reeks of insecurity because it's like, please don't let my teammate ever challenge me. The only person in, quote unquote, equal machinery that might be able to beat me, don't let them challenge me. It's like, well, no, well, if you're a champion, you need to prove it and you should just be able to beat them yourself. I mean, that's why I don't like, I'm not a fan of that. And I have mixed feelings when it comes to team orders as well, because it's like, oh, you tell them to swap, especially when it comes to fighting for wins and titles. I don't think you should really, if both drivers are fighting for championships, you can't realistically impose team orders because that's just obviously favouring one over the other. Whereas if one of them is Checo and is nowhere near it, and they are the wingman, then it's great. But yeah, like the Mercedes situation before, it's Hamilton Rosberg, you can't do team orders because it's like, well, no, we both want this title and we don't care about the constructors because we've won it anyway. This is just a one-on-one between us two.
A quick thing on Alonso contracts. They are quite atypical because, I met Peter. Peter and I met at the F1 exhibition a month ago, and I had the pleasure of informing him that Alonso has this clause in his contract that allows him to get every single F1 car he has driven with, because his museum has he has like 20 Formula One cars there, which is literally more than is exposed at the F1 exhibition, by the way. It is one of the biggest Formula One museums in the world. He has his cards from like the 90s and the 80s. And famously, Lewis doesn't have his 2007 McLaren, which he has been trying to get, but McLaren is just like, no, we can't give it to you. And there was an interview where he's like, but Alonso has it. And it's like, yeah, but Alonso has it in his contract that they give it to him. So, yeah, so whoever Alonso's lawyer is or whoever his agent is that negotiates the contracts, they do a pretty handy job because 20 Formula One cars, that's a lot of money. And that's irrespective of his salary. So, yeah. But talking about Formula One World Champions, I did remember that we didn't properly talk about Max. I assumed we did when we spoke about Perez. But quickly on Max, what was going on in Baku? I'm not too sure. Why was he P6? Why was he struggling that much? Yeah.
So I can start first, and obviously Peter can add anything he wishes after. So my my take on it was, first of all, Max had a handling imbalance this entire weekend. Like, you could clearly see from his onboards, from his comments, he did not have the pure front end grip in the car to get the car turned. And so, what really happened was that for the first time we saw him just on pure pace, slower than Perez. And the really bad thing is that they were changing things like right before qualifying, right before the race. And whenever you're doing that, it's a bad sign. It means you're desperate to find a setup that works. And I think ultimately, with Max, once they can get that setup back, I think he's going to be back on it, because this setup is affecting everything. It's not only just affecting his confidence in the car and his speed. We saw that after the pit stop when he was like behind Lando and Alex. He also just, on top of the understeer that he had in the car, it affected him in a way where his tires started to get out of their performance window, and it just created a negative spiral where he couldn't really generate tire temps and get grip as he wanted, which led to him not having confidence. But then as the tires started to basically move out of their window, it just exacerbated his existing problems. So instead of the car handling getting better throughout the race, it just kept getting worse and worse. He started to have even more understeer as the race went on. So a total disaster. I mean, and if anybody wanted an answer to, is it better to have Perez on form and Max suffer a little bit than to have Max just carrying the team, or like earlier in the season? So like, Perez was impressive today, but you've got to think that, if Max was really at one with his car, he could have done something special like he usually does. So that was the big takeaway with Max, is the fundamental setup of this car at the front end is not where he wants it to be. He likes a positive front end, and this car is understeering on corner entry far too much for his liking. I've seen this movie before with another driver, so I am sympathetic to Max. I hope they can fix it for him.
So we've seen in the past few races that Red Bull, their performance has gone out the window, which is odd because cars don't typically get worse. They can get slower relative to their competitors, but they don't get worse to drive. Now, there has been this thing of they had their own sort of brake steering type system, which they've been using, which got banned. And Horner, because he's a bullshitter and a compulsive liar, is pretending that's had no effect on their performance. I'm thinking, is it any accident that they get rid of this and suddenly the car doesn't brake properly? There's no grip or anything. It's like, I think we might have found the problem, because now it's going to be a miracle if Max wins any further races this year, when in the first half it looked like he was just going to repeat what he did last year. And so now he's just in the position of trying to hang on and hoping that the other three drivers trying to take that title just keep taking points off one another. Because from this point forwards, if one of those three breaks ahead and is on the podium in every race, there's a very good chance they could take the title from him.
Yeah. You're totally right, Peter.
Yeah,
I mean, there's just,
and I really hope that doesn't happen. Yeah. I've said it, but I just really hope that doesn't happen. Mostly because, well, two things. Firstly, Lando would be one of the weakest world champions. Secondly, can you guys think of any other time where the champion was racing for the third ranked team in the standings? Because we mentioned 1982, but that was Keke Rosberg in a Williams that was fourth. But I couldn't quite find a case where a driver was racing for the team that was in third. Obviously, Alonso in 2010 and 2012, that could have been the case, but that didn't happen. So
I mean,
can you think of it?
In 82,
Yeah.
the thing is that car was probably better than fourth fastest, because the catch was that his teammate was Derek Daly.
Yeah.
Without that, it probably would have been higher up, but again, they were disadvantaged because they didn't have a turbo engine. But
okay. So Kimi in 2003 could have happened, but come on, Prost in 86 wasn't far off, right?
Frentzen was close in 99 in the Jordan. Not obviously not close enough, but yeah. Because half of them, there are ones where the performance is good, but it's just the reliability is ruining it, and you have to factor that in, giving advantages to other teams. So I don't really know, but we're in a position now where I feel like the only way the championship can be salvaged in terms of being well deserved is if Max wins it, because everyone else would have put on a complete train wreck of a campaign at some point in the season to either not win it or win it by the skin of their teeth. And Max did his job in the first half, but then he's been pretty rubbish since then, although a lot of that is not his fault. And even if he does only just win it, it doesn't look good on him either. Like Lando almost can't salvage this, even if he wins the title. Piastri maybe can. Leclerc, actually, to be fair, Leclerc probably could. It's just it's the team themselves that blow everything with him. But I don't know. It's just this is a very, very strange season.
I want to make a quick interjection here because it's interesting how McLaren had the least issues with graining in this race. I mean, Red Bull were complaining of rear tire degradation. Charles suffered from it. Mercedes were horribly suffering from it. And so it just points to me that Red Bull's updates just haven't been good for whatever reason compared to their usual standard. And that McLaren seems to just be able to bring updates like every weekend that work as well. That's been another driver of this, season, and that McLaren has ascended to the top. And the other teams still have a good car, but they seem to trip over themselves with their updates that don't seem to be as effective. Summing it up, I think Max has done a good job this season, given he hasn't had the quickest car for most of it now. And yeah, actually, it's strange because I'm not, I didn't think I'd be saying this, but I actually think Max probably does deserve it. And it'd be a shame if he didn't win it, because I don't think any one driver or team outside of Max has really driven a consistently good season. So it would be a bit of an odd title win for whoever, because I mean, if Lando won the title, I don't know if I could say anything other than he'd be one of the weakest world champions in history. I mean, like no matter what happens in the remaining races, he's had a very inconsistent season, given his car. So I think it'd honestly be better for Formula One if Max won this, because otherwise it'd be rewarding another driver who isn't probably deserving of it. What do you think about that, guys? I mean, maybe I'm overreading this.
No, it's the mistakes are so clear from Lando. It's not just us being picky with the attitude. Or for example, if Leclerc was in this position, I guess some people could have been a bit critical of us not being keen on Leclerc being a champion becoming a champion because we're being very, very nitpicky with his mistakes, or some of it weren't his fault. Norris's mistakes are obvious even to his fans. I mean, it's overshooting the entry the stop for his for the pit stops. It's missing braking points. It's messing up qualies. So it's very clear. But yeah, anyway, moving on to a very impressive team at Baku this weekend, Williams. They were just really, really good, and it was nice to see. Colapinto, I think he has surprised everyone. Doesn't apart from some of the Argentinian fans who, across every sport, are extremely passionate, if not annoyingly passionate. Maybe they thought this was possible, but I don't think anyone outside of Argentina ever expected Colapinto to have such an entry in the sport. I thought he would be performing like Sargent with less crashes, but yeah, he was 12th on debut, and I think 12th, and 8th yesterday, which would have been 10th anyway, because he overtook Hulkenberg at the time, just with good tire management and good pace. I thought it was done, because he was 5 seconds behind Hulkenberg with 7 laps to go. And then, yeah, 3 laps from the end, he overtakes Hulkenberg. I was super happy to see that COL banner on the left just go up a place, and then obviously after the crash, that's a P8. So that's 4 times more points than Logan scored over his 18-month career. And that point from Logan was also not even during the race. He finished P12, and then there were disqualifications. So Colapinto, in the end, it could become a De Vries case where in 2026 people are trying to find him a place, when that was not meant to be the plan. Colapinto was just meant to be there for 4 months. And Albon, again, I know that Ciaron is not the biggest fan of Albon, but I think he had a decent race. Point taken, though, that if he really should have overtaken Alonso. I don't know if it was Alonso being really good, but Albon on mediums should have gotten Alonso.
I mean, this has proven to be quite a revelation, really, for Williams to get Colapinto in, and it's completely re-energized them. Maybe it's a honeymoon phase and things will kind of degrade a bit, because that was the case with Sargent. He started reasonably strongly and then collapsed about 3 or 4 races in to his run. But I feel like if Logan was still here in a race like this, he probably would have finished like 14th or 15th, not 8th. He would have been knocked out in Q1 again, because even though this is a strong circuit for Williams because they're straight line merchants, so they would always do well here. But he's almost matching Albon as well.
Yeah.
And everyone was saying, particularly early in the season when he had the double overtake in Canada, oh, Albon's this generational talent, he's absolutely amazing. And it's like, no, he's being fluffed by Logan. We'll see what he's really like next year when Sainz is in there, and we've got someone who really is a properly experienced workhorse of a driver. Colapinto, to be honest, I would take these 8 races and just run with it, because his only other realistic option is to go to Sauber, and they've got other people they're interested in, and it's a worthless seat anyway. So he'll probably just end up back. He'll either end up back in Formula 2 next year, or he'll just be made a reserve role similar to Jack Doohan or something.
Formula E has become an option for Formula 2 rejects now.
Formula E, somehow they always had infinite free seats. Like, I don't understand how, but people are always, every 5 minutes, someone else is signed for them. And IndyCar as well, I think the teams are just allowed to have as many cars as they want running, because there are always free seats going. And I don't get how the turnaround is so stupidly high.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like Argentine Italians have ever done well in Formula 1, except Fangio. But yeah, my point is that Colapinto has been pretty stunning in my opinion, because Williams split the strategy. I mean, they started Colapinto on mediums, and then they put Albon on hards. So I mean, Colapinto was ahead of Albon, and then I think really in qualifying, and then in the race, basically because Albon went longer with his first stint, and Colapinto basically had to. What was it? I mean, Colapinto had to do something like a huge number of laps on the hard tires. It gave Albon a chance, basically, in the end to catch up with him on the mediums, on the fresher stints, because he ran in his first stint. Colapinto had 41 laps on the hard tire. So that's to ask like a rookie in his like first race, basically, to do that, second race.
At Baku as well. That needs to be stressed. At Baku, one of the hardest tracks on the grid, on the
Yeah,
calendar.
exactly, Nav. Like that's really impressive. So this kid's talented. He had good pace. He was racing well, and I agree with your earlier sentiment that Franco did a really good job holding up Hamilton and Behrman. He capitalized on Hulkenberg's mistake. He earned that point that he got, or that eighth place that he got. But I agree with your earlier sentiment as well that Albon should have probably passed Alonso with the tires that he had, and so um, he passed Hulkenberg and his teammate, but he just couldn't pass Alonso, and then the medium started to struggle, and he had to manage. But you'd think a better driver maybe could have made that work. It was there for the taking. So, I mean, at the end of the day, no offense to Albon, he did a good job, and he should be given credit. But is there a driver in the world that, if they were in the same position as Albon was, could have passed Alonso today? Yes. Yes, I think there could have been a driver on the grid, some of the top ones that probably would have passed Alonso. So it's a good result for the team. They clearly have two drivers now that can at least bring a baseline solid level of performance. But you got to think that they're going to expect Sainz to be the driver that really pushes them to another level, because I think Albon is a very good driver, but I don't think he's a great driver, and I stand by that despite his very strong result today, which he can be proud of.
Yeah. Well, the two facts about Colapinto. Firstly, is it's first time an Argentinian driver has scored points in more than 40 years. Last one being Carlos Reutemann in a Williams. Sadly, Gaston Mazzacane wasn't able to score any points in his backmarket team.
Or
And
Esteban
secondly,
Tuero.
Colapinto.
Legend.
Sorry?
Or Esteban Tuero, or yeah. Ricardo Zanino, I think he was the 80s. Those are the only other ones post Reutemann.
Was it only them?
I think it was only those three. I can't think of any others. Most of them were all in the 50s and 60s. They were just the stragglers trailing behind Fangio, running off his coattails.
Yeah, true. But yeah, so that's the first fact. And secondly, Colapinto, he was the first driver to ever be eligible for an FIA Super license without even having raced in Formula 3 and Formula 2 at the time in 2021, because he had done so well in the categories that are lower than Formula 3, so F3 Asian, F4 somewhere. So he had racked up 40 points just, before even reaching Formula 3, which was insane. And I think that kind of alerted the FIA, because they were like, you're not meant to be able to get 40 points without even having competed in F3. He was 18 and he already had 40 points. So he is a driver who shouldn't be completely unknown to the enthusiasts. He's not a driver who completely came out of nowhere. He has always been on the radar. Obviously, that radar was fueled by Argentinian fandom, but he is a good driver, so that's not that surprising. And thirdly, seeing Albon run in third for like 10 laps, blocking Norris and Verstappen was quite a sight, because that was on pure pace and that was on all the tires, which also confuses me as to why he wasn't able to catch Alonso at the end, because holding up Norris for that long, it shouldn't have happened. And maybe that's the straight line speed that Peter was talking about, or that's what I think. It's that Albon is really, really good at defending. He's just not that good at chasing.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out we forgot to mention the great Oscar Larrauri, who drove post Reutemann as well.
That's the other one.
Yes, for the European team. But now I'm just going to stop here and say I actually agree with your points there, especially about Albon at the end. He's had a few races, where he's defended well, but just seems like something's lacking, doesn't it? He has to make that decisive move, and that's what they're going to look to when Sainz comes to the team. They need someone that can just push that little bit extra and get those extra 2 points when it really counts.
Yeah, exactly. Well, moving down the grid now, there was another rookie making not his debut, but his second race as well, just like Colapinto. Ollie Behrman had a very good weekend, actually. FP1, he was faster than Hülkenberg, and then, obviously FP1, it could be different fuel load, different tires strategies, different setups. So we weren't too sure what to think about it. And then in quali, he holds it up to Hulkenberg, who is one of the best qualifiers on the grid. Now, what did you think of that? Would you say that that was maybe a clear indicator of his pace? Should we not read too much into it? And then obviously in the race, defends well against Sir Lewis Hamilton, as he called him in a recent post. Just a really good showing, and it's nice that at least in Formula One he is showing pace, because if you just look at his Formula 2 results, we know that they haven't been great for a number of reasons. But yeah, when he jumps into a Formula 1 car, he just seems to be able to turn it up.
I mean, across the weekend, yeah, there's very little in it between him and Hulkenberg. Right near the end, Nico suddenly just fell backwards and lost like 4 places or whatever, even though he was running ahead of that pack of Colapinto, Behrman, and Lewis. But yeah, so just, drove competitively, very determined, because he was really angry with himself because he got eliminated. He qualified 11th again, and so got knocked out in Q2, and I think he was quite annoyed at that. But yeah, strong weekend overall. But you would look at his results in Q2, which are Q2 in F2, which have been kind of dog shit, and be like, why is this guy getting a seat? Because we're in the position now, the 3 rookies next year. One of them is 16th in F2, the other one is fighting for 6th or 7th, and the other one isn't in F2 at all. And the people who are actually at the top, it's like, Hadjar, Maloney, the other one, Bortoletto, are not
Aaron.
really. Yeah, and Aaron, who is imploding his career right step by step, they're not really in the discussion nearly as much. Or if they are, it's for a seat with fucking Sauber. Yeah, good weekend for them. Had Magnussen been racing, I don't think he would have been beating Nico, but maybe they would have fashioned a way of using him as a battering ram again. I don't know.
Yeah, it was an interesting race because I think Hulkenberg was comfortably ahead of Behrman up until he hit the wall. And but it still doesn't change the fact that Behrman was ahead of him in qualifying. And even with that setback in FP3, where I actually think Colapinto was more impressive than Behrman. And the reason I say that is because, Behrman was over managing his tires early on. And I think that really hurt his race, right? He then picked it up after he realized, like, actually, I'm conserving these tires too much. Bit of a rookie move, right? But he kept it together. He didn't make a unforced error like Hulkenberg, let's say, in that sense. I mean, we can debate like what happened there. I mean, with Hulkenberg, he hit the wall. I know he ran over a massive piece of debris as well, so it was not ideal for him. But overall, I think the team didn't necessarily miss Kevin Magnussen this weekend, because you've seen Kevin and Nico are usually like massively disparate in performance. And, I don't see Magnussen somehow magically being like way quicker than Hulkenberg, and Behrman still got a point. So it was impressive. I mean, I don't think he was as good as Colapinto because, like I said, he was overly conserving his tires, where before Nico hit the wall, he was doing a really good job in that first stint. And his second stint on the hard tire was actually unbelievable. I think Hulkenberg did a really good job on that second stint. So, just so stupid, he hit the wall, and then when he was recovering from hitting the wall and losing that position to Colapinto, then he hit some piece of debris, and he didn't react quick enough when the green light came back on, so Hamilton and his own teammate overtook him. So,
Well, I don't know how
that's
strict
weird.
Haas are. I don't know how strict Haas are with their contracts, but it feels like it would make a lot of sense to just put Behrman in Kevin's seat right now, and have Behrman learn more for 2025, and also just free Kevin Magnussen from this fate he has of being a battering ram for everyone else, and
Yeah.
for Hulkenberg to profit. It really would make more sense to just put Behrman in that seat right now, but I
Just
don't
keep
know
him in,
how.
for the rest of the year.
Yeah, no, but genuinely, because he is performing faster. I mean, he's performing better. He is faster, and it makes more sense towards the future. And I'm sure Ferrari would love them for that. They might even put some more money into Haas. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I feel like that's the solution. I don't know if that's feasible, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I
and
think
the
one
last.
thing.
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, Nav. One thing I just wanted to say about Behrman was that he was impressive. He did get the point in the end, so praise is definitely due. But what's he doing saying that, you know, some drivers on the grid you can't race with and some others, like I get he was trying to praise Hamilton in his post-race comments because he said, oh, it's great that I can, race Lewis wheel to wheel and not make contact. With some of the other drivers on the grid, you can't do that. Kid, this is your second ever F1 race. Like, I don't understand like where that's coming from. Like he doesn't know this grid well enough in F1 to make a comment like that. So I don't know. I just wasn't very impressed with that. It just seems like an unnecessary shot at the other drivers when he hasn't really raced. But I get it. He was probably just trying to send a compliment Lewis's way. It just seemed odd the way he said it.
Well, there's this, but also the fact that he was saying this about Lewis, who famously is not good at battling and famously does not give space and hits the rear wheels of the drivers he battles with. So, in both senses of his sentence, there were mistakes. Other drivers would probably give him the space, and also, no, Lewis is not the driver you want to be battling with in the midfield. Um, and there are countless. I mean, there are lots of rookies. Albon, the main one, who has come to blows with Lewis's antics with hitting other drivers. So yeah, no, I see what you mean. Behrman shouldn't have made that comment. Well, moving on to the last three teams, I honestly don't have much to say on Alpine and AlphaTauri other than they were pretty transparent. I mean, they weren't doing much. Invisible, sorry, not transparent. They were pretty invisible. And yes, Sauber we will have a bit more to talk to because there's the whole driver situation. But firstly, do you guys have anything to say on Alpine and AlphaTauri other than they just weren't there?
I'll power through them quickly because AlphaTauri, yeah, Ricardo was beyond invisible. Tsunoda has the collision at the start, gets damage, has to retire in a race that otherwise, I suppose, apart from the end, would have had no retirements, because that ended up probably triggered Stroll's brake problem. Alpine, well, Ocon had 2 engine failures in practice, and then the car was barely working in quali, so something is very wrong there. Gasly started from the pit lane, did nothing. Ocon obviously still had problems in the race because he was spent the whole thing being trailed by the Saubers and stuck with them the whole time. So I don't know that's just they've slipped back when they were useless at the beginning of the season, and now they've become useless again. And I'm waiting for.
So you don't want to believe that Sauber caught up to Ocon. That's incredible. I would say that Sauber may be improved.
I mean, I think Sauber, again, speed traps. Their car was a rocket ship in a straight line, but basically couldn't turn. They basically had a NASCAR car this weekend. I just think Alpine, yeah, I think he just had a very sick car, and it wasn't a good weekend. And I'm waiting for Darth Briatore to execute Order 66, and we can find out what his real plans are for the future with this and those Mercedes engines they're trying to get. I don't know with them. And then with Sauber, split strategy. Bottas went long. Joe pitted near the end. Just before they were about to get lapped, because everyone was like, "Oh, that's going to mess things up with this fight at the front," and they didn't really make any difference. Joe was last, but then he suddenly passed Ocon and Bottas just before Stroll retired. So I think he had pace on those. I say, but yeah, they're still the slowest, and they were still just they spent the race battling Stroll, who pitted at the start, and Ocon, who started in the pit lane. So they were just miles away from everyone else, but still not slow enough that they only got lapped right at the very end. So the field spread is still small, but there's just still nothing going on there.
Yeah, I would say that of those bottom 3 teams, Gasly was the standout. He actually had a good race because he took a gamble. First of all, he started, right at the back or in the pit lane, but he was on the limit, and he himself said it was one of the best races of the season from his driving, from a point of view of his own driving standard. And the thing is like they took a gamble with him. They were running along and they were hoping something would happen, but it didn't until the very end of the race. Ocon was a disaster this weekend. I don't really know what on earth was going on there. And I think with the Saubers, they split strategy, but it didn't really get them anywhere. Long road ahead for that team. I think Joe, I have to say, like, yeah, he extended his first stint, and then he had a good final part of the race on medium tires. So yes, like we mentioned here, he did pass Ocon. So he did okay. I mean, he did better than Bottas, but overall, that team is just so far off the pace. It's not a good look. And with Tsunoda, we don't really know what he could have done because he had half his car taken off, or half the side of his car taken off by Stroll on the first lap. So I think all three of these teams will be looking in the mirror and saying that's just not good enough. I mean, they had a horrific weekend all around, and yeah, there's nothing else to really say about them. They're just off the pace.
Well, on Sauber then, that seat that is still just available is kind of the only really interesting discussion to be had for the 2025 grid. Who right now would you put in that seat between Bottas, Bortoletto, I guess Porsche, maybe Zayn Maloney? I think Maloney is a bit behind now. So who would you have?
Okay, so I'll go quickly then. It would actually be between Giovinazzi or Gabriel Bortoletto, and Gabriel Bortoletto is probably my choice because look at Behrman and Colapinto. Do we think Bortoletto is like miles off their level? No, we don't. I think everybody knows Bortoletto is like right up there with them, and those two have done a really good job, and it actually reflects very well on those F2 drivers. So I'd put Bortoletto in there. He's got Alonso's praises. He's done well in F2. He's young. He's apparently fast. Give the kid a chance. Let's see what he can do.
I mean, I'll throw a bit of a curveball and say Joshua Dirksen. Like he's cooking at the moment, and let's do it old school. Let's get a driver in who has a slightly unconventional path and isn't part of a driver academy. Let's prove that you don't have to be part of a junior program to do it. You just have to
State funded.
Yeah,
Make it really old school, state funded by a random country. That always works.
Yeah, or possibly cartel. I don't know. Yeah, just something like that. Because he's doing well, and I'll use that so we can make the quickest of segues into Formula 2. Because yeah, he's doing amazing. His teammate for the past 2 weekends, Niels Koolen, that was a fun little interlude of being 4 seconds off the pace in Monza and then 7 seconds off in Baku, and without the safety car,
insane.
Without the safety car in the sprint race, he would have been lapped in a sprint race had there not been the safety car. So
he was 20 seconds down after 7 laps on the guy who was 21st. It was something he had never seen before.
Dangerous. That's just dangerous.
He was the only person who his lap times were over 2 minutes as well. He was the only person who was. It was similar to, was it there was someone that almost, it was when it was Baku when Alessio De Leda almost crashed into Yuri Vips getting lapped.
Yeah.
Is because they asked they asked Behrman and Colapinto about Koolen, and they were like, well, he didn't cause any red flags at least. Like he didn't.
That's the thing. Koolen, like he was just trundling along, but there was no point across the entire weekend actually, not even in free practice, where he was dangerous. So that's where he was a big difference to Raghunathan or De Leda or some of the other.
I think it's more because he wasn't fast enough to crash. Like that's basically what it was.
But at least he wasn't messing up things. So I really like there was a tweet that was like Niels Koolen is a good example of why every Twitter expert should shut up, because Niels Koolen is the closest thing we'll ever get to a normal person competing in Formula 2. He was the benchmark for like one of us in a car, and this is why we should shut up about the other drivers. I mean, which I think is fair.
Well, normal if you ignore the fact that his dad is the co-founder of Booking.com, which is obviously how he got the seat. But I get normal in that,
that's why you were saying Booking.com all weekend.
His dad runs Booking.com. That's why he got the seat for 2 rounds. Because before this, he did a little bit of F3 and he's done lower ones. I think he did, was it Euro Formula Open or something, or one of the F4 series, and he finished like 37th in the standings.
Yep.
I don't think he's ever scored points in anything before, except Indy Next, because you get points for every position you're in. So yeah, it was just 2 rounds of money, but they've already said he's not coming back in Qatar, which isn't for another 2 months or whatever. So they'll put someone in. Maybe they'll give it to Lindblad, I don't know, or something, because Yeah, we had him. Mini was in, and so was Mansell, and come up from F3. They both did well. Goethe has been absolute
Browning.
dog shit since moving up.
Luke Browning was in as
Yeah,
well.
Luke
and
Browning was good.
obviously
Yeah, he was good.
Luke Browning gets so much attention because he's British, but people don't realize he's 23. He's
He's
older than
he's a fossil.
I think he's older than Piastri. So yes, he was the fastest in Formula 3, but
20.
because Piastri is a 2001 like me, and
Yeah, almost as old as
I think
Logan.
Browning's a 2000.
And 5 years older than Kimi Antonelli. Speaking of Kimi Antonelli, so his birthday, 25th of August 2006. So he was born when Vettel was getting fined for speeding in the pit lane with BMW Sauber on his Grand Prix weekend debut during Friday practice for the Turkish Grand Prix in 2006. I don't know where Alonso finished in that race because Massa won it, but yeah, there's the context because of course Behrman was born during the Spanish second. Okay, because Behrman was born during the Spanish Grand Prix in 2005, which Alonso won, and now they're racing each other. So there's the longevity thing. The other one was what's his face? Maloney imploded, locked up, went off, blah blah blah. Ollie Goethe has been absolute garbage since he moved up in the last 2 rounds. He crashed infinitely in Monza. He crashed again this weekend. He was stuck behind Coulon for ages because he had to pit, and so he has not shown up Red Bull well because Red Bull just took on 4 new juniors, and they're probably going to kick some of the other ones out. So I think he might be gone soon. I don't know, and we'll probably see Lindblad in that seat in a couple of months for Qatar and Abu Dhabi instead of Goethe. And yeah, there was that big crash at the start, which they punished Miney because he didn't do the start sequence properly. It's like, well, the crash never would have happened if the cars had anti-stall. So that was kind of like victim blaming. So that was another huge crash that didn't need to happen because anti-stall, for some reason, is still not a thing in Formula 2. And it's been the source of... It literally destroys people's careers because if you spin and stall, you lose points, you lose supervisors points, it's done. It's actually insane. I mean, Formula 2 is turning into it really is turning into a joke now.
Yeah. Wow, that's something to think about for sure. And you can't be tampering with the junior series like that. It should be a really pure environment to see and to evaluate the young junior talent. Shame to hear that that's going on there. Vettel made his debut in FP1 of Turkey.
Yeah, youngest driver at the time, 19 years and 52 days, I think.
Yes, and who topped FP1 in Turkey 2006? Well, it was Kimi Räikkönen. And my point here is...
Kimi Räikkönen jumps there had to happen.
Didn't he crash? He crashed in the race, didn't he?
Well, he didn't crash. What happened was he was hit.
He got crashed into.
Well, he got crashed into, and then he pitted, and McLaren were looking at his car for like 30 seconds and said, "You're good to go out." And as soon as he went out, he lost control of his car because it was broken, and he slammed into the barriers after this incident.
Yeah.
This had nothing to do with the conversation. I just felt like bringing this up. I'm sorry. So, to your point
I'm
about
sure the comments were absolutely loved that you brought this.
He was quickest.
Yeah.
Look it up.
Also, Sakon Yamamoto outqualified Takuma Sato in only his second race. I think Sato had mechanical problems because that's the only reason that Yamamoto would outqualify anybody. But then Sato, I think he got caught up in that crash at the start because there were several cars crashed at the beginning, and then Yamamoto spun and stalled the car at turn 1 in the race anyway. So now this podcast has turned into random facts about the 2006 Turkish Grand Prix.
Just because Antonelli was born there, and we were mentioning Antonelli. But because I know that Ciaron doesn't follow closely Formula 2 but keeps track. So there are 2 races left, Qatar and Abu Dhabi. And Bortoleto has now taken the lead as a rookie, which is incredible. There hasn't been a rookie winning Formula 2 since Piastri, and we are seeing how Piastri is performing. So this is amazing. That is held by Hadjar having 2 races in a row where he hasn't scored a single point. So sprint races and feature races. That's not really because he's not been performing, but just at the moment in Formula 2, if you mess up quali, it's really hard to go back up. At least Monza and Baku are not the easiest tracks to just get back positions, which is ironic, but in Formula 2 it is. So yeah, he qualified bad in both races. And Bortoleto, he scored, I was checking, so in the first 3 races, he only had like 15 points after the first 3 races. So he was like 12th in the standings. But then in the last 9 races, he's finished in the top 4 6 times, including 5 podiums. So he's really, really turned it up. And yeah, in the last 2 races, he has scored, quick maths, 35, he scored 45 points when Hadjar has scored none, and Aaron has scored 22. So yeah, Bortoleto now has the
That's
lead
good.
by 4.5 points, and if he does win the title and he doesn't have a seat for next year, it would be just criminal. You cannot have a Formula 2 rookie champion without a seat in the next year. That's something you need to consider.
The only barrier I could see is because he's a McLaren junior and not a Sauber one, but that doesn't seem to affect things as much these days because it seems like teams will take anyone except their own juniors nowadays.
Yeah.
But yeah, the others are just imploding. I mean, Aaron's imploding and just crashing into people. Same with Maloney. Hadjar, I think he had his lap times deleted in qualifying, so that's why he had to start at the back.
Yeah.
And then we saw that fossil Richard Verschoor win the feature race. Because
everyone was so annoyed because Verschoor winning is like it's like no one winning because it's useless.
Yeah, it doesn't count. It's like overtaking Bottas. It doesn't count. Like it's yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, Victor Martins won that race. I mean, when I looked at the standings, because they disqualified Miney, even though he barely even started the race, and I saw that, and it was right next to Verschoor, and I was like, oh god, because I was waiting for them to disqualify him again, but that hasn't happened. That would have been
Victor Martins, by the way, he is now up to 8th in the standings, and he was trundling along with Behrman at the bottom of the standings for like ages. But he's been recently getting a lot of second places. I'm just checking. So yeah, second in Hungary, second in Monza, second in Baku. So finally he's performing the way he should have been, but that was mostly due to the ART just not performing.
Yeah.
So he's on a late third for like top 5.
He's mathematically in the title fight, but I think half a point still. So he's only just in it. Dennis Hauger's finally been kicked. Again, he's a fossil that, spent 6 years at Red Bull and went nowhere. And so his destiny is Formula E.
But he wants to do a 4th year, which there's nothing that can come out of a 4th year in Formula 2. There's absolutely nothing.
If you got all that Norwegian oil money, why not? And yeah, Jack Crawford, no one talks about him. He's only won one feature race, but he's been quite decent. He's still just about in the game. But nobody has been consistent at all. Because we've seen this, surge in performance from Victor and
Bortoleto has been
at the end, and
since the 3rd race, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Bortoleto started really badly. I mean, he had that double retirement in Australia, but otherwise he has broadly been very consistent. But Hadjar, a lot of it is not Hadjar's fault, but there's been just someone clearly just doesn't want him taking the title. Maybe it's Horner, because then he feels obliged to throw him in the AlphaTauri, and God forbid they might have to get rid of Netflix. I don't know.
But Dirksen being ahead of Behrman in the standings is insane. So just last sentence on that. Dirksen is actually ahead of Behrman at the moment.
And people forget he's a Freca graduate, and he was invisible in Freca last year because everyone was just laser focused on Antonelli.
He's got 61 points. That's insane. That's a lot.
So guys, having said all that, in both your opinions, who is the best driver in Formula 2? What's your ranking of like the top 5 drivers in this series? Because it sounds like there's a group of very talented drivers, but they've all been a little bit inconsistent. So you guys are in a position where you had to pick like the best one of this current field. Who's your pick?
Oh God, top 5.
Right.
I mean, but you have to say Bortoleto.
Yeah.
And Hadjar delivering. I would love to say Aaron and Maloney, but they're just self-sabotaging really badly.
I would put Martins there because otherwise we're just listing the standings. I think Victor Martins is a very good driver who has been unlucky with how the car was working at the start, but he was meant to be the champion this year. He is extremely fast. So him, obviously Colapinto, because we're seeing this in Formula 1 at the moment. So yeah, my picks are Bortoleto, Hadjar, Martins, in no order. Bortoleto, Hadjar, Martins, Colapinto, and like I kind of have to say Antonelli or Behrman because obviously Ferrari and Mercedes see something in them. They must be good, but I would rather go for Maloney because I just like him.
I want to say Dirksen on the basis that maybe he's just a straight line merchant, I don't know, but when he's driving well, he is kind of squaring up to Antonelli and performing relatively similar to him, even though he's again the one that doesn't have all the backing, he doesn't have the hype, and he was miles away from him in Freca, but has adjusted extremely well to Formula 2.
You are underestimating how bad people thought he was meant to be the Amaury Cordeel of the field. Because you're being nice to his record, but his record was really just bad. He was meant to be a backmarker.
I mean, initially he was pretty average, and then he got the podium in Imola, and from then on, that thing started improving. The last three weekends have all been really good for him. Yeah, Cordial's a funny one because again, he's got that Cordial construction company. He's the heir to the fortune, and he is just getting worse now. I mean, every weekend there's some kind of penalty or some kind of accident for him, and he's been doing this for like 3 years now. And then the others, I mean, Stanek has gone, O'Sullivan's out. And so they're kind of dropping like flies in the end. Barnard's gone to Formula E immediately. I mean, how the fuck did that guy win a race? In an AIX as well. I say that having
he is good, yeah, but
he's doing Formula E.
Oh, you meant how the fuck in that? How did he win an AIX?
Yeah, I mean, because it was Monaco and it was a sprint race, so he just didn't have to do anything. He just had to qualify 10th, and that's a free win. Ritomo Miata has been extremely disappointing because I really thought he might dominate this because he comes in winning the double of Super GT and Super Formula in Japan, and
but
he is just
big nuance. He had never raced outside Japan.
Yeah,
so this is literally his first time.
So he's like a slightly better version of Yuji Ide.
I think he's gonna be good. Like Miata will be good because you don't win those if you're not good. It's just that we underestimate. At least Yuji Ide had raced in Europe. As you said, like once or twice. It's just
that I get that he doesn't know the circuits, but we have simulators, and even with his level of experience, Super Formula cars are faster than Formula 2 as well. So it's like, it really shouldn't be this. And I get that there aren't any street circuits in Japan. They don't do that there, but still, you should be able to learn how to drive these things. Because in the old days, even 10, 15 years ago, there weren't simulators, and when there wasn't much testing, you just had to turn up at the race weekend and learn it in FP1. Or play the games and learn it, at least learn how it goes off of that. But I get, F2 cars, they don't work at the best of times. The tyres never work. They handle like absolute arse. It's not a spec series as well. Everyone's engines are completely different, but still, yeah.
So yeah, that was I'd say the Formula 2 roundup is Bortoletto's doing really, really well. Hadjar is kind of bottling it, but we'll see in the last 2 races, because 2 races in Formula 2 are a lot of points. That's maximum of 70 points to be had, so we'll see. And then last thing, outside of just the Formula series, Alex Palou won his 3rd IndyCar championship in 4 years, which is really, really quite impressive. And that's another guy who used to be tipped for Formula 1. Didn't quite happen, but yeah, 3rd title in 4 years.
Yeah, the IndyCar guys that they were talking about F1, that seems, I think because the seats have run out, that's died out, because Colton Herta, they've forgotten about him, and I think he hasn't been brilliant anyway. Pato O'Ward is doing...
He won yesterday, actually.
Okay. Pato O'Ward, he's doing FP1 in Mexico for McLaren, so he's doing another FP1 session. With him, they keep hinting at that. I think it's because he's a marketing machine. That's kind of why they keep suggesting he might go to Formula 1. I get that he wants to, but it's like, to be honest, he's doing fairly all right in IndyCar, and he can be a bit of a big fish in a small pond there. So why not? Because there's no room at the inn at McLaren, and I don't know.
I think Palou did get a bit unlucky with McLaren literally having Norris and Piastri, because I think if they didn't get Piastri, or if Alpine somehow did sign Piastri, whatever happened, they could have gone for Palou, and we could have had an interesting IndyCar to Formula 1 switch, because Palou is really, really good. He's just been getting the contract issues with Zach Brown. Remember, he had a big McLaren bust up with Zach Brown on his terms that apparently guaranteed a Formula 1 seat in the next 3 years, and then Zach said, no, we didn't have that. So, yeah, that's a very fast guy who is sadly kind of stuck in the US now. He cannot really leave that unless he wants to go to work or something, but I think he's stuck there.
Another thing I'll quickly mention, I've been seeing news about it. There was a motorcycle rider, Luca Salvadori, was killed over the weekend. I haven't really looked into this. I recognize the name, unless I'm just mixing him up with Roy Salvadori, who was a F1 driver in the 1950s. But that's been getting some traction. I don't know the circumstances, but it seems like, well, that's quite a common occurrence when it comes to motorbikes, let's be honest.
That's tragic, and it reminds us that motorsport is dangerous.
Yeah, that's really quite a shame that some motorsports are still seeing so many issues. Oh yeah, and the last thing on the non-Formula related stuff, WEC, Mick Schumacher got a podium at Fuji, his first podium since leaving Formula 2. So Yeah, good to see for Mick Schumacher that he's getting some success at Alpine. BMW, Alpine, and Peugeot all got their best results of the week. No, it's not of the week, of the season so far. So BMW in second, Alpine in third, and Peugeot in fourth. So that was nice to see.
Yeah, busy weekend for motorsports in general. Okay, tops and flops. Tops, Oscar, Charles, and I'm inclined. I would have said Checo had it not right, except for right at the end. Oscar, Charles, and Colapinto tops.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with that and say Oscar, Alonso, and Colapinto.
Flops. I didn't think I'd be saying this, but Max, Lewis, and Tsunoda. Yeah.
Good. So tops, yeah, Piastri, Alonso, and Leclerc, because it wasn't his fault what happened, so I'll just throw Leclerc in. And flop, I'd say Lance because he was performing so well in the last few races, and this was the first full weekend I watched in like a few months, so I expected Lance to also be in Q3 right next to Alonso, and he wasn't. So, and he did cause the only incident we had in 50 laps. So yeah, Lance would be my flop for the race.
Agreed. I mean, he was definitely the worst. Ocon and Bottas weren't great either, but yeah, I'll go with Lance.
So in a week's time, we've got Singapore, it will be a very long race. Hopefully, some interesting stuff happens. Once again, strong circuit for Checo, but generally, as we saw from last year, very weak circuit for Red Bull. So that one could be a real crunch point going forward, because after that, we have our basically autumn break. We have to wait 4 weeks to continue this, and the same with Formula 2, because God forbid every Middle Eastern country isn't on the calendar. But yeah, there's Formula 1 is in a very good place at the moment, and things are getting very exciting.
We have a championship on our hands. Who will win that championship? I don't have a clue, and that's a good thing. But I expect 3 or 4 teams fighting for the win in Singapore again. So yeah, things change quickly after the domination of last year, I guess.
You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.